Good afternoon, Commissioner. The next witness is Tamara Lich.
Ms. Leach, will you swear on a religious document or do you wish to affirm?
I would like to swear on the Bible, please.
For the record, please state your full name and spell it out.
Tamara Lich, L-I-C-H.
Do you swear that the evidence to be given by you to this commission shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do so swear.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Brendan Miller for Freedom Corp and also counsel to Ms. Leach. We have already invoked in writing on October 7th, 2022, all the proper provisions of the relevant statutes with respect to testimony here today, but I believe my friend's consenting that I can have that invocation marked as an exhibit. If we could bring up document HRF 00001610, please. And if we can just scroll down to, I believe, the third page. Oh, fourth, my apologies. And there is the invocation. And thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, I understand she's under subpoena, so just confirming that. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Ms. Leach.
Good evening.
My name is John Mather. I'm Commission Counsel. I'm going to start with some questions about your background. Can you tell the Commission where you were born?
Saskatoon, Saskatchewan.
And where do you live now?
Medicine Hat, Alberta.
And could you tell us, in brief, just give us a summary of your employment history?
I've been primarily oil and gas logistics and administration.
And we understand, or the Commission understands, that prior to COVID-19, you were politically active. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, I was.
Okay. You were, among other things, a regional coordinator for Wexit in southeastern Alberta.
Yes, sir.
You were on the board of directors for Wexit Canada.
Yes, sir.
And at one point, you were vice president of communications for Wexit Canada.
Yes, I was.
For those who may not be as familiar with Alberta politics, can you explain what Wexit is?
Wexit started out as a movement, I guess, based off of the Brexit movement that started in the UK. And I joined that movement. I was very concerned about the things that I was seeing happening to Western Canadians in politics and became, I guess, a bit of an advocate. So I got involved in the movement and we morphed into a provincial and a federal party.
And at one point, Wexit merged into the Wild Rose Independence Party, is that correct?
It did, yes.
And you, at some point, left that party and then joined the Maverick Party, is that correct?
How that happened was I was sitting on two boards when it first came out, the provincial Wexit Alberta as well as the Wexit Canada. And during COVID, my husband and I relocated to Manitoba for about 19 months during the pandemic. So I left that board right as that merger happened. But I stuck with the Wexit Canada board and then we renamed ourselves into the Maverick Party.
So is Maverick essentially Wexit but with a new name?
Basically.
Yeah. And when you said you had concerns about, I think, how the West was being treated, can you expand on what those concerns were?
Yes, sir. At that time, we were dealing with Bill C-69 and Bill C-48, and I was just seeing friends and family that worked in the energy industry in Alberta suffering as a result of some of that legislation. There was job losses, and I just saw people losing their jobs and coming into my office, you know, handing me their resume with tears in their eyes, asking for a job 2 weeks before Christmas. And I just felt like I needed to get involved and exercise my democratic rights.
And again, for people who maybe not be as familiar, can you explain how those bills at least in your mind, led to the job loss you're talking about?
Well, Bill C-69 was the No More Pipelines bill, and I think you can recall at that time there was the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion and other pipelines that they had been discussing or proposing, Energy East, for an example. And when all those got canceled, a lot of people didn't have any work.
What is the goal of the Maverick Party?
The goal of the Maverick Party was to seek constitutional reform for better equality for Western Canada, or to seek an independence, very much like what Quebec has, being referred to as a nation within a nation.
And what, can you give any examples of the constitutional reform that the Maverick Party is seeking?
I believe one of them was the getting more equal seats in the House of Commons. I mean, a big concern for people in the West is that every election, before the polls even close in Alberta, it's already decided. The elections are already decided. So I think myself and a lot of people in the West just felt like we didn't really have a voice in the House of Commons.
Does the Maverick Party consider the federal government to have too much power?
I don't necessarily think so.
And going back to the constitutional reforms that you referenced, and then I think the next thing you said was if there isn't constitutional reform, then ultimately the goal of the Maverick Party is independence from Canada. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Have you ever been a trucker, Ms. Leach?
Never.
The commission understands that in 2019, you also participated in the Yellow Vest movement.
I did.
Can you explain what the Yellow Vest movement was?
Well, at that point, there had been Yellow Vest. I'm sorry, I don't speak French. I'm not sure of the French term, but there had been similar protests in France. And the organization that I joined in, Medicine Hat, again, was primarily to deal with the legislation against our energy industry, which is what we were advocating for. And we would have rallies every Saturday from 1 to 2 in front of the Tim Hortons and stand there with flags and hold signs, that kind of thing.
And so those Yellow Vest rallies were rallies in opposition to the same legislation we spoke about earlier?
That's correct.
And you mentioned that it was, maybe is inspired the right word by the movement in France? What would be the right word?
I guess inspired, maybe.
And were you aware that the movement in France eventually came under some controversy for being associated with Islamophobia?
I was not aware of that, no.
And so I think you mentioned, but it's the commission's understanding that you were the organizer of the Yellow Vest rallies in Medicine Hat?
I kind of moved into that role. Like I said, I was going to the rallies and meeting people and offered to help in any way that I could.
And it's the commission's understanding that the Yellow Vest in Medicine Hat ended up changing its name, is that right?
Yes, they did.
And why did the Yellow Vest group in Medicine Hat change its name?
I read this morning an article, and I don't really remember what happened at that time, but I did see in the evidence that I was reviewing last night that there had been death threats against the Prime Minister. So clearly we wanted to distance ourselves from that.
Right, and so if I could pull up COM 50908. And then if we could scroll down to the headline. This is an article from January 12th, 2019. It says, following death threats to Trudeau, Yellow Vest Medicine Hat looks to change their name. Is that the article you're referring to?
Yes, sir.
And the article states that not on the Medicine Hat Facebook page, but on the more general Yellow Vest Canada Facebook page, there had been death threats that had been posted about Prime Minister Trudeau. Do you recall that occurring at the time?
Faye, I don't really recall that, but I do recall that we did change our name. I'm not sure what the threats were per se, but we did change our name.
And did the name change? I appreciate you might not recall the specific threats, but the name change was as a result of those.
Yes. That's not something that I ever advocated for or anybody that I was associated with in the Medicine Hat movement.
Right, and if we could go to page 3 of the article. It quotes you, Ms. Leach, as saying, "Stave positive is number one. We don't want any name calling, bashing, or belittlement. Respecting people's privacy is also a big one. We will not tolerate threats, hate speech, or anything like that. We don't want that kind of stigma attached to our cause." Do you see that there?
Yes,
And I take it that's a view you held at the time and a view you still
Absolutely.
hold today?
absolutely.
Right. And that's ultimately you had to deliver a similar message at times when it came to the protests in Ottawa. Is that true?
I did, yes.
The commission has heard evidence on a few occasions about a convoy in 2019 called United We Roll. Are you familiar with that convoy?
I am.
Did you participate in that convoy?
I did not.
Did you have any involvement in that convoy?
I didn't have involvement in that convoy other than maybe connecting people's phone numbers or getting people connected that were going. At the same time as that United Reroll was starting, there was a lot of, I guess, mini convoys, I would call them, in little communities. And so I was a part of organizing the little one that went through our community.
So you connected people's phone numbers and then organized a smaller convoy within Medicine Hat?
Yes, sir.
Can you provide more detail about what you mean when you say you were connecting people's phone numbers?
Well, just because I've moved around a lot, I know a lot of people, and that would have been the extent of my involvement if someone was looking for a contact number, per se.
Were you aware at the time that Pat King was involved in the United We Roll convoy?
That's when I first heard of Mr. King.
And how did you first hear of Mr. King?
I was on social media, so of course, you know, you're scrolling and you would see videos, so that's how I came to know of him. He had a social media live stream, he was live streaming it.
During United We Roll, did you ever communicate with Mr. King?
No, I did not.
When was the first time you communicated with Mr. King?
The first time I ever remember communicating with him was after we had started this convoy.
So in the context of the Ottawa convoy?
Yes, sir.
We'll get back to that in a minute. Between United We Roll and the Ottawa convoy, did you follow Mr. King on social media?
I followed Mr. King until the United Reroll was over, and then I stopped following him at that point.
And when we talk about following, did you make a deliberate decision to click on follow on Facebook?
I did.
And why did you make that decision at that point in time?
Because it was over and I really had no further reason to follow him.
Did you come to form an impression of Mr. King's views in following him during United We Roll?
I thought he was loud, very boisterous. Other than that, I didn't really know too much about him.
Do you recall finding anything he said offensive with respect to United We Roll?
I don't recall that, no.
Did you communicate with James Bowder at all during United We Roll?
I don't believe so, no.
Do you remember when the first time was that you met Mr. Bowder?
I would have met Mr. Bowder for the first time in person in Ottawa this past winter.
Right. And then had you met him virtually before then?
No. Or, sorry, when we were organizing, my apologies. Yes, as we organized, he was in the meetings.
So again, within the context of
Yes.
January 2022?
Yes.
So moving now to the Freedom Convoy, how did you get involved in the Freedom Convoy?
A friend of mine sent me Mr. Barber's TikTok video where he was calling for a shutdown on the 23rd of January. She sent me that video and I watched it and I texted her back right away and I said, well, what do you think about possibly another convoy to Ottawa? And she kind of laughed and said, well, it didn't really accomplish much. I mean, it was great to see the crowds come together, but
Could
they-
you just slow down a bit, please?
Sorry,
for the
yes, sir.
Translators.
Yes, sir. And then I'd reached out to another friend and I asked him the same thing. And we just sort of came to the same conclusion that we weren't sure if that was an idea that would be successful. A friend of mine, or an acquaintance of mine from Red Deer that was involved in the United Reroll gave me Mr. Barber's phone number, and I contacted him on January the 13th. And we discussed, I can't really remember the details of the conversation. I do remember that said I'm here to help you in any way I can. My background is logistics and organization and administration, and you are going to need social media and you're going to need some funding. And if I can help you at all, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay. A few questions arising out of that. Do you remember who the acquaintance was that gave you Mr. Barber's phone number?
Yes, it was Glenn Carrot.
Okay. And did Mr. Carrot participate in the convoy, do you know?
He did not.
Okay. And the two friends that you indicated you had a conversation with about whether or not a convoy again was a good idea, who were they?
Cindy Parker from Medicine Hat. She ended up assisting on the finance committee that I was going to create, and she also assisted with the social media.
Yeah.
And Kevin Tuchinski, he was a friend of mine that I worked with in Manitoba.
And I understood from your answer, but correct me if I'm wrong, that both Miss Parker and I'm going to mispronounce the last name, Mr. Lichinsky, was that?
Tuchinski.
Tuchinski, did they participate in United We Roll?
No, not to my knowledge.
So why did you want to get involved in the convoy? Why did you want to reach out to Mr. Barber?
I was growing increasingly alarmed with the mandates and the harm that I was seeing the mandates inflict on Canadians. Sorry, I'm going to get emotional. I'll try not to. And I just felt like I needed to exercise my democratic rights. I have tried over the years emailing MPs and just never got a response. And I just felt that this was important for Canadians who had been living under lockdowns and restrictions for 2 years.
When you say emailing MPs, had you been emailing them about COVID-19 mandates?
I believe I did once, yes, but I had emailed previously, like I said, in conjunction with the Bill C-69 and Bill C-48, and never felt like anyone was listening to me. And I know it wasn't me. There was other people that were emailing also, and you just get these, thanks for contacting our office, blow-off emails.
So you had formed this impression that you were having difficulty getting someone to listen to you in the government based on letters you sent primarily with respect to the pipeline issues we've been talking about?
That's correct, yes.
How had COVID-19 restrictions or mandates affected you personally?
Well, I lost my job. My husband also lost his job on the same day. My parents run a pilot truck business, and a lot of their business was involved crossing the border, which they were no longer allowed to do. At the time of the convoy, there was rumblings of stopping cross-border, interprovincial, travel if you were unvaccinated. My parents live in Saskatchewan, my grandmother's in Saskatchewan, and I have a daughter and a granddaughter in Manitoba. So I found that incredibly alarming.
And why did you lose your job?
We were sent home, I guess, in early January because of the Omicron variant. And that combined, obviously, with the downturn in the economy at that time, they closed the shop that I was working at. And the majority of us were laid off.
And what shop was that?
It was for an oil and gas services company.
Were you affected at all by vaccine passports or other restrictions on unvaccinated people?
We didn't go out. You know, my husband and I played in a band. We weren't allowed to even go and play. Everything was shut down. That's part of the reason that we went to Manitoba after we both lost our jobs. We went to visit my daughter and realized that the city that we were in was basically a ghost town, and we would prefer to be out on the farm in the country, helping them on the farm and being productive.
What did you want to achieve by participating in the Freedom Convoy?
I was hoping that somebody would come and listen to us and listen to the concerns that we had, essentially, about the mandates in particular.
Did you have a goal beyond having someone come and listen to you about the mandates?
No, we wanted to be heard. We wanted to have discussions. We wanted to end the mandates.
Was your goal to have the mandates end, or was a discussion enough, or was that something you hadn't turned your mind to?
For me, I feel if we would have just been able to have a discussion with somebody, that would have at least opened a dialogue. And as the convoy came across Canada, you know, Canadians were telling us, don't stop until we're free, don't stop until the mandates are lifted. So honestly, a bit of both.
The frustration that you were describing with respect to mandates, did that feel familiar to the frustration you had been feeling with respect to the pipeline and oil and gas issues?
I was much more frustrated over the mandates.
And why was that?
Because I was seeing families torn apart. The suicides in my hometown were so numerous that they stopped reporting them. Elderly people were dying by themselves in long-term care facilities and saying goodbye over iPads. My grandma is 94 years old, and she was locked in her little apartment by herself for 2 years. And now that she can go out and do things, she's not healthy enough. She lost 2 years of her life. My father is, I'm so sorry.
Take your time.
My father is a very social man. He is the Coffee Row, Saskatchewan father. And I remember him telling me one day that he went down to the local restaurant that he went to every single day. And these are small towns where everybody knows everybody, and he was asked to leave. And I didn't want my children and my grandchildren to live in a world like that. I was becoming increasingly alarmed listening to my Prime Minister call me a racist and say that I shouldn't be tolerated. I found his rhetoric to be incredibly divisive, and I'm a believer that if you're a leader of a country, you have to lead all of your people, even if you don't agree with them. And I just saw so much. Coming across Canada every day, I heard stories. People, at least 3 people would tell me they were planning their suicides until we started the convoy. Or stories of people that we were too late. I heard from families that were living in their vehicles because they'd lost their jobs. I heard from people that had lost their jobs and lost everything. I have the tears of thousands of Canadians on my shoulder who every day told me that we were bringing them hope. I saw little old ladies praying on their knees on the side of the road, and I saw little children holding signs saying, "Thank you for giving me back my future." Sorry.
So you offered to help in reaching out to Chris Barber, and it's our understanding that one of the first things you did was create a Facebook page, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And started the GoFundMe campaign, is that correct?
Yes, sir, I did.
And you did both of those things on January 14th?
I did. And a Twitter account also.
And a Twitter account. Was that different than the Twitter account that we saw earlier today? That was your personal Twitter account?
Yes, that was my personal one, yes.
With respect to GoFundMe, had you ever done fundraising before?
Not on that type of platform, just community, selling chocolate-covered almonds or stuff like that.
So never done an online social media driven
No.
fundraiser? Okay. And then it's the commission's understanding that on January 17th, you created, or the organizers created, a finance committee, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And can you explain what the finance committee's purpose was?
Yes, well, when I started the GoFundMe, I had asked, I think it was Mr. Barber, what should I set the target for? And he said, $200,000? And I said, no way. I kind of laughed. I was like, that sounds greedy, and I don't believe that we'll ever hit that. And I said, well, how about I set it for $100,000? And I said, I feel even funny about doing that. I was literally expecting maybe $20,000 in donations, which I was prepared to handle. I felt I would be able to handle that with my very minimal accounting skills. And I can't remember what the total was up to on Monday morning, but I realized that I wanted to create a finance committee so that Canadians that were donating this money would rest assured that we were going to be open and transparent and accountable, and that they would know exactly what was happening with their donations. I just felt that was so important.
And how would a committee assist with that?
Well, there was, in the initial meeting, there was 2 bookkeepers that had obviously accounting experience. Cindy Parker was also on that committee. Nolene Villebren joined us also. She's a clan mother, a Dene clan mother from the Northwest Territories. And we were in consultation with a chartered accountant in Medicine Hat. So we formed the committee. Obviously, we had a lot of things to figure out, such as how we were going to pay the costs of the truckers to get to Ottawa. And they came up with some calculations based on distance. I'm not sure if it's been entered in evidence, it might be, but because clearly if you're driving from Vancouver, it's going to be, way more expensive than if you're coming from someplace in Ontario.
And we'll get into that more in a minute. The Commission also understands it was around January 21st, 2022, when the GoFundMe donations hit $1 million. Does that sound accurate?
Probably. There was a lot going on then, but yeah.
Yeah, in and around there?
Yes.
What was your reaction when that milestone was hit?
I believe I was blown away. We did not see that coming, did not expect that we were going to have that level of support. And it was funny as we were driving across Canada and the committee member or somebody would call me or text me and say, you've got to bump it up again, because there was a few days there where Canadians were donating $1 million a day. And it was very exciting and exhilarating, of course, but at the same time, I would just feel myself almost getting like more and more anxiety, because from my view, when you're talking that kind of money, the lawyers are coming, and here we are today.
Right, because that kind of money, in the millions of dollars, a lot of responsibility.
It's a massive responsibility.
Other than set up the finance committee, what else did you do to address the responsibility that came with having millions of dollars?
Well, as you heard from Mr. Dichter, I contacted him, and I was, for the same reason that we added Chris to the accounts, I didn't want to be solely responsible. So I added him onto the GoFundMe campaign, just as I had added Chris Barber as a signatory on my accounts.
Anything else?
Probably. Sorry, my mind went blank.
That's okay. And then on February 2nd, 2022, we understand that $1 million from the GoFundMe account was transferred to a TD bank account in your name. Is that accord with your recollection?
Yes, sir.
And then that TD bank account was frozen the next day. Does that sound right?
That sounds about right, yeah.
And then there was actually another TD bank account that got frozen. Is that correct?
Yes, we opened I opened a checking account underneath that account so that we could keep the e-transfers separate from the GoFundMe donations. I don't know why, I just thought it would be maybe easier that way to keep them distinct. I wasn't sure, obviously, again, what was going to happen, and I was trying to just make sure that all the boxes were ticked and everything was going to be easily identifiable or easy to account for, I guess is a better way.
Right, and it's the Commission's understanding that donations were received both through GoFundMe and through e-transfers, and what I understand you'd be saying is to segregate where the money came from, you opened a second account specifically for
Yes,
e-transfers?
sir. Yes, sir. Within a few days, or probably actually within a couple days of the GoFundMe campaign, we were receiving messages about people that were very hesitant to use the GoFundMe platform, and they were requesting an alternative method to donate money. So that's why we started that.
How did you find out that your bank accounts had been frozen?
Mr. Chadiros and I had gone down to the bank. The lawyers had flown in, and we were going to cover the cost of that flight. And so we went down to the TD Bank here in Ottawa, and we were going to wire that company. And that's when we were told, no, there's a hold on your account. The lady was excellent. She said, she gave me a note and said, there's a Mr. J. Stein that has left his name on here if you could contact him. And then she indicated that he was working with the fraud department.
If we could pull up com.or 705, and Ms. Leach, while it comes up, this is the overview report that was presented this morning with respect to crowdfunding. And if we could go to paragraph 87, which is on page 33. So here, Ms. Leach, it's describes that on February 5th, 2022, you attempted to make a wire transfer to Northern Air Charter, PR Inc. from an Ottawa TD branch. This transaction was denied. Is this what you were referring to just previously?
Yes.
And that was the flight, I think you said, that had brought Mr. Wilson and your husband and others to Ottawa?
That's correct, sir.
Who approved the using of the funds for that purpose?
Oh, boy. I'm not sure if at that time we had already had the board created or not.
And the board, are you referring to the board of the directors for the not-for-profit corporation?
Yes, yeah, I don't know if that was created yet. I don't really remember, honestly. I think it was maybe with me and Chad and Mr. Barber.
Did you consult with the finance committee before attempting to use the money for that purpose?
I don't believe I did.
Do you know
I don't
why
recall.
sorry.
That's okay.
Do you know why you didn't consult with the finance committee?
Other than it was very busy and crazy times, it was kind of chaotic at that point. So we recognized that we needed to have legal counsel and legal advice here on the ground. So I guess we felt it was just urgent, and so that's why.
If we could, we can take that down. In that same report, I won't turn it up, but it indicates that most of the $1 million was frozen and you weren't able to withdraw it from the account. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Do you recall how much you were able to withdraw?
I believe it was $26,000. So $10,000 of that, if you would like me to break it down for you.
You're anticipating my question, so yes, please go ahead.
$10,000 of that was wired to a bulk fuel supplier. $3,000 was e-transferred to another fuel provider. Chris and I had gone down, Mr. Barber and I had gone down to the TD, and we withdrew $3,000 in cash from one account and $10,000 in cash from, one branch, and then went to the next branch. And then, and I remember being very nervous about it because I was very conscious that we needed receipts when we needed to be accountable. And they were the road captains that went out and bought whatever supplies, fuel. I believe some of that went to fuel. And when they brought the receipts back, there was actually extra money in the kitty.
So when you're talking about the road captains, are you talking about the $13,000 that wasn't for the first two bulk fuel purchases you
That's
had?
correct, yes.
And am I understanding you correctly that that money was distributed to the road captains?
I believe so. I didn't keep it. I had 10 million problems of my own, so I didn't want to be handling any of the cash. So I think I gave it to Chris, and then Chris distributed it to the road captains from there to provide fuel.
And the $10,000 that was used for the one bulk fuel purchase, do you recall where you purchased the fuel from?
I believe it was a company called fillerup.ca.
And there was also a $3,000 fuel purchase. Do you recall?
Yeah, that went to Adam something who was with the Quebec, the Quebec part of the Convoy. I'm sorry, I can't remember his last name.
That's okay. After the fuel was purchased, how was it distributed?
The fuel,
Yes.
that I left up to the professionals.
Did you, through dealing with the professionals, did you come to have any understanding of how they distributed the fuel?
I'm assuming with a fuel bulker of some sort, or I honestly don't know.
And when you're talking about the professionals, who are you referring to?
The truck drivers.
Was there anyone in particular or any people in particular who were responsible for overseeing the logistics of distributing fuel?
We did have a few volunteers that came on board. There was a gentleman that was there for the first, I think he was there for the first week, who looked after that. And then he had to leave, and another gentleman stepped in and took it over, who was from Alberta, Calgary, I believe. And then another gentleman from Ontario that assisted.
And who were those gentlemen?
The first one, I believe, was Joey Mitsu, M-I-Z-U. Tihan, I'm sorry, I don't know his last name. He was from Calgary. And then John Skubik, who is from Ontario.
What happened to the receipts that the captains returned?
I have them in an envelope in my room. They were scanned and sent, I believe Eva Chipiuk had scanned them. And there was, one of the road captain's uncle was here, so he created a spreadsheet so that we could keep track of all of them also.
If we could go to GFM 156. So this is a GoFundMe attestation letter. Are you familiar with this document?
Yes.
Can you describe what this document is and what its purpose was?
I don't really remember the details. Is it okay if I read it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it looks to me they just wanted confirmation on how where the funds were going and how they would be distributed.
Right, and the clerk has scrolled down now, and what I want to ask you about is, it says, with the oversight of the Finance Committee, I will execute the following plan to meet the stated purpose of the fundraiser and distribute the funds raised and released to me, and then it sets out a process. Do you see that there?
I do, sir.
Do you recall making this form of commitment to GoFundMe?
I do, yep.
And it's our understanding that GoFundMe sought this sort of commitment as part of the ongoing discussion about whether or not it would release the funds. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe they were trying to do their due diligence.
And you see here, it sets out a process. Funds will be distributed via e-transfer directly from the TD Unlimited checking account, established in my name to individual Convoy participants. Participants must submit their own Convoy registration forms, fuel receipts, and verification for their participation from the road captain. To that, participant registration is verified by the respective road captains upon demonstration of completion, receipts, and confirmation of the journey to Ottawa. And reimbursement amounts will be calculated at an estimated rate of 62 cents per kilometer driven. Do you see that?
I do, sir.
So this attestation, it appears, was contemplating how people would be reimbursed on their way to Ottawa. Is that right?
Yes.
Was any similar plan made for disbursements once the convoy was in Ottawa?
Well, I guess what the Finance Committee, we decided to do was obviously come up with registration forms, because we felt that that was really important, and a code of conduct also. And that is based off of the calculations that the Finance Committee had come up with to pay them for. So when it was not anticipated how large this was going to grow, I thought e-transfers would be a very easy way to disperse the money, and that's what the registration was for, so that we would have their contact information and their email addresses in order to make that happen.
So my question was with respect to distribution once you were in Ottawa, was the plan to use the registration forms once money was distributed in Ottawa as well?
It was, that was the plan.
Did you follow that plan?
Well, we didn't need to because the funds were frozen and.
What about for
returned.
the $26,000?
I'm sorry?
What about for the $26,000?
Oh, that was from the e-transfer money, not the GoFundMe money.
So the GoFundMe money, you had a distribution plan, but for the e-transfer money, you did not?
That's correct.
Did you consider having a distribution plan for the e-transfer money?
At that point, I had handed over everything to the finance committee because once Mr. Barber and I got on the road, I was quite busy doing other things. So my communications with them were quite quick, and I trusted them. I trusted that they knew what they were doing, and yeah.
And while you may have turned things over to the Finance Committee, it's the Commission's understanding, again, from testimony and documents that we've read, that you became the person associated with the GoFundMe campaign and the person associated with the $10+ million. Was that your experience?
Yes.
What impact did that have on you?
Well, it was incredibly, again, it was an incredible responsibility. And again, I wanted to always be as open and transparent about it as possible, which is why I started doing the lives so that I could let people know, what was happening. The finance committee has been formulated and try and do little updates on what we were achieving at that point.
Did you get a lot of questions about the money and what you were planning to do with it?
Oh, of course. Yeah, everybody wanted to know about the money.
Did you get a lot of people approaching you and asking you if they could have some of the money?
I did, yes.
And Mr. Eros, who we've spoken about, had an interview with the commission, and he said that at some point after February 1st, he spoke with you on the phone, and you told him that you were feeling overwhelmed because a lot of people were circling you and asking for money, and he said that you called them vultures in a text message.
Yeah, that's how I didn't mean they were vultures. I just felt like the vultures are circling.
How did you handle having all these people circling around you and seeking money?
The best I could. I had created a finance committee to ensure that the money that was donated was protected and that I was protected. And I just wanted, I don't know, I just put one foot in front of the other, and I would just explain that I was not in a position, like this was not my money to give out. And that we needed to, the money was primarily, like it said in the GoFundMe campaign, primarily for it was for the truckers for fuel, food, and lodgings if needed. And so I couldn't buy hot dogs. I didn't feel like buying a sound system for $150,000 was appropriate when I couldn't get money out to give to the truck drivers. So I had a lot of people coming at me, and my hands were tied. At one point, I had somebody threatening that they were going to get a lawyer to come after me for the money, which was kind of ridiculous because that was really, at that point, just going to tie it up even longer, I'm
going to now ask you some questions about the organization of the Freedom Convoy. First question for you is, at the time, did you see yourself as one of the founders of the convoy?
A supporter.
Who did you see as the founders?
Mr. Barber and Miss Belton.
Did you view Mr. King or Mr. Bowder as founders of the convoy?
I did not.
When you joined, were you aware that they had been assisting in planning and promotion of the convoy?
I found out, and I can't recall if it was in my initial discussion with Mr. Barber or the next day. It would have been either the 13th or the 14th that I found out that they were involved, but I don't remember exactly which date.
I appreciate that you saw yourself as a supporter and not one of the founders. Did you come to see yourself as one of the leaders of the convoy?
I came to see myself as part of a team. And maybe it was because of the GoFundMe that my name was on, or maybe it was because of the live videos that I was doing. I felt I was perceived as that, but all I wanted to do was help.
Did you see yourself as having any say greater than anyone else on the team?
I did not.
And who did you see as the members of that team?
Obviously, Miss Belton and Mr. Barber, the road captains, Joe Jansen, Miranda Gassier, Ryan Mihilowitz, Dale Enns, Sean Thiessen. I hope I'm not forgetting anyone.
So when Mr. Wilson described you as an organic leader, do you agree with that statement?
I guess that's what I alluded to with my previous answer.
Right. And what I understood from your previous answer is that you were seen as the leader, but you yourself didn't feel that you were the leader.
Absolutely not.
Chris Barber in his testimony discussed that there was power struggles among the organizers. Was that something you observed as well?
It was, and I think when you have any type of organization, there's always power struggles involved, and ours was no different.
What power struggles did you observe?
I saw what I perceived was, people, organizations coming in, perhaps trying to take over, or I hate to use the word take over, but I believe that they were all there with the same goals that we had. It's just that maybe some had different agendas or were looking to possibly promote their own brand. There was obviously, I had a lot of people coming up to me as we were just talking about, telling me what I needed to do with the money, should do with the money, could be doing with the money, what I had to do, and it was very overwhelming.
What were some of the people or groups that were doing that?
The first one that I was concerned about was an organization called Taking Back Our Freedoms. And I felt, again, that they were there with the right end goal in mind. I remember they showed up with bags of swag. All of a sudden, I was getting pulled into meetings with, I believe it was Give, Send, Go, because we were looking at, there had been obviously problems starting with GoFundMe, and we weren't sure what was going to happen. And so I honestly don't, I remember being in meetings and conference calls, and I really didn't even know what was going on. And I had a discussion with Mr. Eros after one of those, and he was concerned.
When you talk about bags of swag, and that was is that a case where you were concerned that, well, the group might have had the same goals, they were seeking a promotional opportunity? Is that what you're referring to?
Essentially.
Right. Did you have concerns that there were other groups or individuals who were seeking to use the mass media coverage, and the $10 million as a way to promote themselves instead of focus on the cause?
Not that I can think of offhand now.
Did you ever turn your mind to whether or not this was acting as a promotional opportunity for yourself?
Absolutely not. I never in a million years saw this coming. I never had an agenda. I literally just wanted to help some truckers drive across Canada and stand in front of Parliament with some signs. That was literally what I had envisioned.
So the commission understands that You participated in a press conference on February 3rd, 2022. Mr. Wilson also attended. Do you know which conference I'm referring to?
I do.
Okay. And I'm going to ask you some questions about that conference in a second. But first, I just want to understand when you first met Mr. Wilson.
They flew in on the evening of the 2nd of February, I believe, and it was quite late at night when they arrived. They came to, I think I was still at the Ark Hotel at that point, and they came up and introduced themselves. There was five lawyers, I believe, that showed up, and that's when I first met them.
And how did it come about that the convoy was looking for a lawyer?
Well, I know that there was a doctor that was in Ottawa with us that was quite concerned, I believe, about what he was seeing from these organizations that were coming in. And if I remember correctly, he's the one that set up a call with the JCCF.
Sorry, who was that doctor?
Dr. Francis Christian.
And was it your understanding at the time that it was the JCCF that had arranged for Mr. Wilson and others to come and assist the convoy?
Yes, yes.
And what was your understanding of what the JCCF was?
I had heard of them before, never imagined I'd ever need to use them, about the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom. So I at that point, I just understood them to be a charitable organization that assisted with legal cases, helping to fund defendants in legal cases such as this.
Had you met Mr. Wilson prior to February 2nd?
No.
So can you please explain to the commission how it came to pass that you met Mr. Wilson for the first time on February 2nd and then on February 3rd were at a news conference with him?
Yes, I can. Again, there was a lot of pressure that was happening at this time. It was Mr. Marazzo and I think within the first day or so, I think he saw me running around and people pulling me in all sorts of directions, and he took me into a room and we sat down, and in his very calm voice, he told me, you know, you need to take a day off. You need to just take a day and not do anything and just relax. So I decided, I thought, okay, well, maybe Thursday I'll just try and sneak away and have a nap, or, you know, just relax for a little bit. And so I agreed to it. I was like, okay, I'll try. And then we had a meeting, I think it was Tuesday evening. It was actually probably Tuesday that day that we had that talk. We had a meeting Tuesday evening, which would be the night before they arrived. And one of the gentlemen from Taking Back Our Freedoms told me I was to be at the Marriott Hotel for a press conference the next day at 1 o'clock.
So was that on the first going to the second, or the second going?
I believe that was the first going into the second.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry.
I didn't- yeah.
And I said, no, I can't. I can't. I'm going to get some rest. And they were quite alarmed that I was turning them down. I have no media experience. I felt, and I'm not saying that this is what they were doing, but I felt at that point like I was literally being thrown to the wolves. They were going to take me to the Marriott, give me 10 minutes of media training, and then put me in front of the mainstream media. Like, I grew up in Saskatchewan. This is not my world, you know? And so I was, of course, I had a lot of anxiety, and it was a big responsibility for us here, you know? I was really concerned about being put in that situation, terribly unprepared.
So that was the first.
Yes, sorry, I haven't answered your question.
Oh, so, no, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. If you're.
Yeah, I forgot. I still hadn't answered it. So Mr. Wilson and the team came in on Tuesday night. We met with them. He explained to me his reasons for being there, which was a bit of concern for his children also. And I immediately liked him and his team. I told them about this press conference, probably begged him to help me because he's had experience with this. As someone who is a very trusting person, I was rapidly becoming aware that I needed to be careful who I trusted, if that makes sense. And so I trusted Keith and his team immediately. And he agreed to help me, and it was crazy. It was a crazy day. I can't remember if he drafted the statement I made, or perhaps the media committee our communications committee had something to do with that. Anyways, he agreed to help me, and they were like knights in shining armor, in my opinion.
You said in that answer that maybe we'll back up. So February 1st, I took it from your answer, it's fair to say you were already feeling overwhelmed by everything that was going on?
Yes, definitely.
And,
Before I left Medicine Hat, I was feeling overwhelmed.
and now you were being asked to do a press conference, which you were not feeling prepared to undertake. Is that fair?
That's fair.
And you said in your answer that you also were getting the sense you needed to be careful who you trusted.
Yes. Because as these groups would come in, I did trust them. Like, if you wanted to help, we need your help. You are welcome here. And in that instance, if I may back up just a bit. So as we were organizing before we even left, obviously the finance committee was one thing I recognized needed to be created instantaneously or right away. Our Facebook page was being inundated with messages that I was unable to keep up with. So I found volunteers and created a social media committee to have that, or to look after that. I then realized that we needed, I guess, a media team or I guess a media team would be the best thing. So there was a little committee made with that, which you heard Mr. Dichter allude to today that he was a part of. And I forget where I was going. Could you ask me your question again, please?
My question was really, you said in the February 1st to 2nd period, you began sensing you need to be careful who you trusted.
Oh, yes.
And I wanted to understand what had caused you to have that feeling.
Yes. I just can't remember what my point was with the committees, but anyways. Yeah, I felt at that point like everyone kind of, not everyone, I felt that some people didn't see me. They just saw $10 million over my head. And of course, as they would come in and these organizations would come in, and there were many, many wonderful organizations. And obviously we were very grateful for their help. But again, in that case, I was feeling as the days went on, I was getting more and more uncomfortable with them coming in and taking over the meetings that we like our briefing meetings. I actually left the Ark Hotel because all of a sudden they were in the room next to me on the 7th floor, which I thought was really odd. And one of the road captains made mention to me that we had a coffee in my room one morning, the road captains and myself. And they mentioned that when they left, they were opening and closing their door to see who was leaving my room.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but can you explain who the they is in this situation?
I'm not sure who the room was, who it belonged to, but Mr. Beyer and Mr. Peloso and their team were in that room.
And they were with the Taking Back Our Freedoms group?
Yes.
Was there any other groups causing you this sort of concern?
Not that I can recall.
And so what was different about Mr. Wilson and the people he was with?
What you mean, why did I trust them?
Another way of putting it, yeah.
I felt that they were genuine. As I said, when Mr. Wilson was explaining to me his reasons, he was a lawyer, obviously. He was sent there to help us, but he was also had concerns, and he was concerned for the future of his children too. And I guess I had to trust them, and he gave me no reason not to.
And then at the next day, you did appear at the news conference with Mr. Wilson, is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
All right. And at that press conference, Mr. Wilson described you as the spark that lit the fire. Do you recall that?
I do.
Do you agree with Mr. Wilson? Were you the spark that lit the fire?
As I said, I never saw myself in that light, and I still don't. I feel like I was part of just an amazing team. I would not describe myself as the spark that lit the fire.
Appreciating everything you've said about Mr. Wilson, and I've heard you, did it concern you that Mr. Wilson opened the press conference by placing you in the spotlight like that?
I didn't really think about it, to be honest.
Now I want to ask you some questions about sort of your day-to-day life in Ottawa when you were participating in the convoy. And we've heard the evidence, and I've already heard you say we understand that it was a busy time, there was a lot going on. But can you give the commission a sense of what you were doing on a day-to-day basis?
Well, when I first arrived there, I was in and out of a lot of meetings. It is honestly a blur. We had kind of a joke there that one day felt like a week. There was so much going on, but we would have briefing meetings in the morning to lay out kind of what we anticipated for the day. As I said, when we first saw this taking off, our number one priority became safety. Safety for the drivers, safety for the participants, safety for the public. So we had a lot of briefings on making sure that, talking about things like keeping the emergency lanes open. I remember, if I remember correctly, I believe the first weekend we got there, we had some problems with, I heard Antifa, that were spray painting vehicles and breaking windows and putting nails under tires. And so they created block captains that could monitor throughout the evening to ensure that people were going to be safe from, I guess, anti-protesters or whatever they are.
So you attended the meetings. What else did you do?
Lots of meetings in the beginning. I was at the Swiss Hotel. It was so many meetings at the beginning, honestly. I tried to get out to talk to people. The first Sunday we were there, there was a church service that we attended, and I spoke with the clan mothers and Mr. Dichter.
And the commission's heard evidence, for instance, Mr. Marazzo, who described himself as responsible for logistics, Mr. Barber, who sounds like he spent a lot of time interacting with truck drivers and speaking with them. Mr. Dichter today talked about how he was responsible for public relations and messaging. We anticipate that Mr. Bulford's going to testify tomorrow and that he was responsible for security and other things. With all of that covered, did you have a specific responsibility?
Mother hen? No. I guess when I first got there was lots of, obviously, meetings to do with the finances and stuff like that. And as I said, they were, we ended up setting up a give, send, go. So there was conference calls and stuff like that. The details I couldn't tell you, but I got out to speak to the crowd and wanted to go see the people, and I went to 88 or the Emblem, I believe it was called. Saw and went to the truckers that were down on Parkway. So I spent some of my time just walking around in the crowd and talking to people.
And fair to say that once the money was frozen in terms of managing the finances, that was something that was mostly off the table?
Yes, yes.
I'm going to ask you about some of the people we've already discussed about and some of the people we've heard in the evidence. You've already talked about Mr. Eros, who we understand was the accountant for the non-for-profit corporation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
How would you describe your relationship with Mr. Eros when he was in Ottawa?
He was a godsend. I will be forever grateful. That man dropped everything to come to Ottawa to help us with the accounting portion and GoFundMe and work with the legal team. And I thought he was great. I have very basic accounting skills, and so to have him come in was a huge load off my shoulders. He could understand what they were talking about. He knew the big words, right? And I was extremely grateful. We had a great relationship while he was here, yeah.
And another name the commission's heard about is Joseph Bourgault.
Yes.
Did you know Mr. Bourgault prior to the convoy?
I did not know.
Did you know of him prior to the convoy?
I did not.
When did you first meet Mr. Bourgault?
I believe we had stopped in, I want to say, we had a stop along the way, maybe Sault Ste. Marie? I can't remember. Anyways, we had a little pit stop, and I believe it was Mr. Barber who introduced me to him.
And when Mr. Barber introduced you to him, was it your understanding that Mr. Barber and Mr. Bourgault knew each other?
I'm not sure if they knew each other or if he knew of him. I can't say.
Fair enough. What did you come to learn about Mr. Bourgault after meeting him?
He's a very good man. He was there also to exercise his democratic rights and express his concern for what he believed was happening in our country also. Just a patriotic, good Christian man.
Did you learn anything about his background?
I knew he had a business in Saskatchewan, a successful farm implement business in Saskatchewan.
What contribution did Mr. Bourgault make to the Freedom Convoy?
Well, as I believe he paid for a lot of hotel rooms. He covered, I believe, at least the rental of one of the conference rooms, or maybe a couple of conference rooms there. Obviously, when the lawyers flew in, my husband was on that flight, and I was quite concerned because I didn't want nothing. I mean, when I started GoFundMe, my savings account was $1.13 overdrawn, so I made sure I put the $1.13 into it, right? So that I never wanted any questions asked. And so Mr. Bourgault actually took my husband and I into his room one day and offered to pay for what would have been, I guess, Dwayne's portion of that flight.
Did he do that?
In the end, no, because I believe after I was released from prison, I was told that Adopt a Trucker covered that flight.
In his interview with the commission, Mr. Eros said that at some point a Ryan Olson asked you for $100,000 to reimburse Mr. Bourgault for the hotel rooms he had paid for. Do you recall that occurring?
I don't recall that occurring, no.
The next person I want to ask you about is Mr. Bowder, who testified before you.
Yes.
Did you know about Mr. Bowder prior to the Freedom Convoy 2022?
I knew of him. I think maybe he was live streaming during the United Reroll Convoy too, or maybe that he was participating or involved somehow. So I knew of him. I did not know him.
What did you know about him?
Really nothing other than he was a participant in that convoy.
Right.
At that point. I think he maybe had a podcast or not a podcast, but a live stream Facebook show.
Did you ever watch that?
Briefly, I might have watched a few clips as I was scrolling through Facebook, but I didn't follow him.
Do you have any memory of what he was streaming about when you did watch?
I'm not really, no.
When did you learn that Mr. Bowder was involved in the convoy?
Like I said, when I spoke with Chris, I can't be sure if it was the 13th or the 14th.
Right.
But their names had both come up. I talked to Mr. Barber on the 13th, and then I believe they had a meeting that evening over Zoom, and so 13th or the 14th.
At any point in time, did you become aware of the Memorandum of Understanding?
I did. I think it was quite a few days after that, and I do recall hearing about it. I never read it. I really didn't pay any attention to it, to tell you the truth.
Do you recall what you were told about the Memorandum of Understanding?
Just that there was a memorandum of understanding.
Were you given any indication about what was in it?
No.
Mr. Wilson has testified and in his interview summary stated that members of the board had come to him at some point in time and asked him about the memorandum and whether or not it was for lack of a better word, legitimate. Were you part of that conversation?
Maybe. I honestly don't recall that.
Did you interact with Mr. Bowder at all while you were in Ottawa?
I ran into him. I didn't really see him that much once we got to Ottawa. So I think I ran into him maybe a handful of times. And if we spoke, I believe it was just kind of a greeting and small talk. I really didn't have anything to do with him.
And we heard testimony today also from Benjamin Dichter. He testified that you two met sometime in 2017 or 2018. Is that accurate?
I thought it was 2019, but it could have been 2018.
It's possible. And then he testified that whenever you first met, that you stayed in somewhat regular contact after that?
Yes, we did, yeah.
Yeah. How would you describe the relationship between you and Mr. Dichter before the convoy?
I consider him a friend.
Do you still consider him a friend?
I'm not allowed to speak to him anymore.
Was Mr. Dichter testified that you asked him to take on a public relations role and messaging role? Was that correct?
I did, yes.
And as part of that, did you give Mr. Dichter permission to post on your Twitter account?
I absolutely did. I asked him to help me with my Twitter account, actually.
And why did you ask him to help with your Twitter account?
Because I was getting very, very busy. I was getting messages about the convoy, and I had my hands full with trying to focus on the Facebook page and help the social media committee, as well as preparing for our departure to Ottawa. So I just asked. I felt like he was excellent on Twitter. And I felt that he could help me with that, just to kind of, I guess, keep getting the message out or the progress.
And the next person I want to ask you about is Mr. King. If I understand correctly, you became aware of Mr. King during the United Reroll because you would see him posting and then you stopped following him at the end of that. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And I apologize if I did ask you this, but had you met Mr. King prior to the Freedom Convoy?
No.
When did you first meet Mr. King?
I was thinking about this last night. I must have met him, well, we were on our way to Ottawa, but the first time I remember now meeting him was in Winnipeg when we were discussing Benjamin's concerns with the video that he'd seen that morning about bullets flying. I'm sure I met him along the way before then, but I honestly don't recall. But that was definitely, I remember that conversation, or being on the side of the road.
Okay. And again, I think we'll get to that in a minute. What would you understand Mr. King's role to be in the convoy prior to that conversation?
I believe he was helping with some logistics. He was, I think because of his previous experience with United Reroll, he had a pretty good idea as to the routes that they would be taking. So fuel, helping to try and find fuel, that type of thing.
If we could pull up COM 50902. While this is coming up, Ms. Leach, this is a news article that's reporting on text messages between you and Mr. Barber.
Oh, yeah.
It was referenced during Mr. Barber's testimony.
Yes.
And before we get to my questions, we have been advised by your counsel that you no longer have access to your text messages. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
What happened to them?
Well, I was in jail for 19 days, and of course, my phone was inundated with messages, and apparently I found out after the fact there's a setting that you can have on your iPhone where you can have them automatically delete after 30 days, and it was set to that.
So we go to page 3 of this article. Do you see where it says on January 22nd? You see there?
I do, sir.
Okay, so it says, on January 22nd, Leach told Barber that they need to have a very frank discussion with King, raising concerns about past allegations against him. Do you see that?
I do.
Do you recall what the concerns were at this point in time?
Well, up until then, I mean, I've obviously followed Pat through the United We Will convoy, and but I knew him by reputation also. And Pat has Mr. King, sorry, has a lot of people that like him and a lot of people that don't. Like, he's a very controversial figure. So I was getting messages and phone calls from a lot of people that were concerned that he was involved. This frank discussion, I believe, came about because somebody had contacted me and mentioned that Mr. King had lied about being a veteran, and which is a very serious allegation. And I just felt like we needed to have a discussion with him and, you know, a frank discussion and I guess find out the details.
And what was your concern at that point?
Well, there was people that were not joining the convoy because they were concerned about him. And again, because of his reputation. I know he's said a lot of inflammatory things, which I was concerned about. And I was concerned that that would have an impact on what we were trying to achieve. It would take away the focus from what it was we were trying to achieve.
So at this point in time, January 22nd, you were aware of Mr. King's reputation for
Yes.
saying inflammatory things,
Yes.
controversial things,
Yes, sir.
things that people may find racist?
Yes.
Okay. Had you ever been offended by anything that Mr. King had said?
I'm not the type that gets easily offended, sir.
But you recognize that some people would take offense and that that could have an effect on the image of the convoy?
Yes.
And I thought I heard you say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that you were actually receiving messages from people who were expressing a reluctance to participate because of Mr. King's involvement. Did I hear that correctly?
That's correct, yeah.
Do you have a sense of how many messages you received along those lines?
Oh, geez. I had a conversation with my MP about his involvement. I remember that. He was concerned about it. Cindy Parker had concerns about him also that she'd raised right away. And yeah, I don't know how many messages or there was concerns, but there was also people that were there because Pat was involved too. Like I said, he did have his followers also, right?
Right, and if we continue to look at the story, it goes on to say that despite the concerns we've just talked about, you said that he was needed by the movement, and then it makes a commentary about later comments, and then it quotes you, later statements, sorry, and then it quotes you as saying, we need him, and I don't care about his past, but it only takes one. We have to control his rhetoric, not even threatening to throw snowballs at Parliament. When you said we need him, was that what you were referring to, that he had a lot of followers? Or was there something else?
That was in reference to conversations that we'd had with the road captains, and some of them, you know, he had been involved from the start and had, you know, made. I think he looked after the accommodations or something in Sault Ste. Marie because he's from that area. So, yeah. So that wasn't necessarily me saying I felt like he was needed. That I was kind of referencing the conversations in general that we were having, and some of them felt that they were concerned that if he left, that the people that supported him would leave. My reference to I don't care about his past is that I had to believe that everybody that was involved was getting involved for the right reasons. And as I said, when I spoke with Mr. Barber, and I found out that they were involved, I was aware of his reputation, and I just felt that I didn't want to start this off criticizing other people, again, because I just felt like I had to believe that people that were joining this movement were joining it with the best of intentions, regardless of their past.
At this point in time, did you think Mr. King was participating for the right reasons?
I believe he is a passionate Canadian.
So is that a yes?
Yes.
It says here that we have to control his rhetoric. At that point in time, did you think you stood a shot at controlling Mr. King's rhetoric?
Well, he's kind of a beast, and he very much speaks his mind. I, again, was just concerned with, to be frank, he was a bit of a hothead, in my opinion. And I was just concerned that he would say things or say controversial things or inflammatory things. And so that's why I added in the, we can't even be threatening to throw snowballs at Parliament, because that's not what we're here for, right? So.
If we can pull up, well, actually, before I do that, so we understand that at a certain point you had a conversation with Mr. King and that you asked him to not come to Ottawa.
That's correct.
And it's our understanding that happened around January 28th. Does that sound correct?
It was in Sudbury.
And describe that conversation to the commission.
Well, we pulled into Sudbury. I believe it was by accident. I think we took a wrong turn. So we ended up in this yard somewhere, and we stopped and had a break. And my recollection was Mr. King came over to the truck, and he said to me, I can't go into Ottawa. I'm getting death threats. And I said, good, Pat, you shouldn't come into Ottawa. And he's made a comment or said something, well, I organized this whole thing. And I said, no, you didn't. We all did. This was basically, I'm paraphrasing, this was a team effort. We all had a part in this. And again, he said something about not going to Ottawa, or he organized the whole thing. And I said, no, you didn't. This movement is not about you. This movement is not about me. You need to check your ego. And if you care about this movement, you will not go to Ottawa.
And in his testimony yesterday, Mr. King denied that you had said you need to check your ego and not come to Ottawa. Did you hear that?
I did hear that.
What was your reaction to that?
Maybe he just doesn't recall it.
So ultimately, as we know, Mr. King didn't take your direction. He did come to Ottawa. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And how did you feel when you learned that he was still coming?
I had other things to focus on, and so once we got to Ottawa, I think I saw him 4 or 5 times, maybe. I believe I'd been there for at least a week. Again, a lot of stuff happened in 3 weeks. And the first time I ran into him was down at Parkway one night, and I was just leaving. And so I didn't have a lot of interactions with him when we were there.
To your knowledge, prior to February 14th, and we'll get to that later, but prior to February 14th, did Pat King do or say anything that caused you concern while he was in Ottawa?
I heard a lot of rumors, but I heard a lot of rumors. So again, I had other things to worry about. I let the truckers or the road captains kind of handle that aspect.
If we could pull up HRF 401346 and then go to page 51, I believe. And again, just to give you some context while we wait, I expect the document we will see is a code of conduct for truckers, and I'll have some questions for you about that.
Sure, yeah.
Maybe I'll take a short break at this point, just 5 minutes to stretch our legs, and we'll come back in 5 minutes.
Is reconvene. La commission reprend.
Thank you for that indulgence. Now we can run through to the end, I hope, and adjourn before it, Well, it'll be late, but go ahead.
It's already dark. So if we could pull up HRF 1346, page 51. And if we could zoom in a bit. So Ms. Leach, this is a document titled Freedom Convoy 2022 Code of Conduct. Are you familiar with this document?
Yes, I am, sir.
Can you describe what it is?
It is a code of conduct. We recognized once the support started coming and we began growing that we should have something in place for people to sign saying that they would adhere to a code of conduct.
Right. Do you recall if this was distributed?
It was put on the backside of the registration forms, I believe.
And those were the registration forms to get reimbursement?
Yes.
Was it distributed in any other manner?
I think they could get them by email or get hard copies. I think we had them up on a website.
Was anything done to proactively distribute them, for instance, to the people who were on the ground in Ottawa?
We had printed off a lot of copies. We had big hopes when this started, and so we'd printed off a bunch of copies to have the road captains take to the drivers to sign, thinking that this would be a fairly simple task, but because of the amount of participation that we had, it was crazy. But I actually did receive a lot of them through email, so they did get out.
I'm not asking for a precise number in any way, shape, or form, but do you have a sense of how many you got back?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
A lot.
Right. And we see here in item 3, it says, be respectful. Everyone will have their own reasons for participating in this convoy, and we need to be respectful of their reasons. What were you trying to capture in that point?
Well, I believe in being respectful, and while I may have been going to Ottawa because of the mandates, there are the mandates. I mean, what my reasons were for wanting the mandates to be lifted may not have been the same as somebody else's reasons for wanting the mandate lifted.
To your knowledge, was there anyone there who was seeking to do something other than end the mandates?
No.
In all the people you spoke to, did anyone ever suggest that they had any other goal than ending the mandates?
Other than hearing about the MOU, which, as you've heard today, I haven't even read it yet, but other than that, no.
And what were you hearing about the MOU? I know you haven't read it, but what were you hearing about it?
What did I hear about it? I just heard that it was a document that was to be presented to the Governor General. I really don't recall all the details. It was just a general in passing, I guess.
Item number 4 says not promote harmful media. Mm-hmm. What did you consider to be harmful media?
Well, no hateful rhetoric. We didn't want any sort of divisive rhetoric. Just again, it goes back to point 3, be respectful. We didn't, I was on lives daily saying that we are going to Ottawa to peacefully protest and exercise our democratic right to assembly. We are not going there to create problems and, you know, I said, if you see anyone that's acting in a threatening manner or an aggressive manner, to get their license plates, phone the police and report it, or contact us and we could report it. We just didn't want any of that type of behavior happening here because that was never what it was about.
Did you believe that there might be people in the convoy who may promote hateful content?
It was a concern. Again, I know when we were on our way at one point, I believe it was when we got to Thunder Bay, we were on our way to Thunder Bay, and I can't remember who it was, but somebody had contacted me saying they thought that there was infiltrators, Antifa, that had infiltrated our convoy from Winnipeg that were maybe going to cause some problems for us. So there was always, that kind of information was always coming to us, right?
Other than potential actions by Antifa, were you concerned about other people potentially making or promoting hateful content?
Not really. Everyone that I talked to and saw, and we're all there for the same reason.
At any point in time, to your knowledge, did any of the organizers have to do anything to, have to take any action because there was reports of either threats, harassment, violence, or hateful conduct, or anything that you would have thought was inappropriate?
Well, of course, there was the conversation that Benjamin, when he called me that one morning when we were on our way, I think it was our second day, and there had been a tweet come out about Mr. King talking about bullets. And so that was obviously concerning. We stopped and we chatted with him on the side of the road about it. He indicated that it had been heavily edited by some media, I'm not sure. But it was obviously concerning.
Do you recall if that bullet comment, whether there was, we've heard evidence of 2 bullet comments from Mr. King, at least 2. One was, Trudeau, you're going to catch a bullet, and one was, this will all end in bullets. Do you recall which one of those?
It was the ending in bullets one. I don't remember ever hearing about the one about the Prime Minister.
Ms. Leach, you can take that down now. Ms. Leach, you've watched much of these proceedings, so you've heard a lot of the evidence that we've heard about people complaining about the horns, people saying there was harassment, there was intimidation, there was unsafe settings. We've had evidence from citizens of Ottawa who said they felt unsafe in their own city. Do you have anything to say to that?
I encountered hundreds and hundreds of Ottawa residents when I was here, thanking me, thanking us, saying that we gave them hope. Ottawa residents and, in fact, federal government employees that were taking donations of food to the truckers, blankets, fuel, and yeah, everyone had said the same thing to me, that, I mean, the word that I heard the most on the way here and when I was here was hope.
Many of the protesters who have testified this week have shared a similar message, talked about the positive, loving atmosphere that that they experienced in the protest. Do you deny that there were incidents of harassment or incidents of intimidation or threatening like the ones we've heard? Do you deny that that happened?
I never witnessed it. I never witnessed any of that type of behavior. Again, there was always rumors, but I never personally witnessed any behavior like that whatsoever. I also heard that the Russians were involved. I also heard that we tried to burn a building down. I mean, there was a ton of misinformation out there. I had my family from Edmonton messaging me, texting me, asking if I was okay, and they were really worried about my safety. And I said, worried about my safety? Like, this is the biggest love fest I've ever participated in, right?
When you hear the citizens of Ottawa, not all of them, I appreciate that, but when you hear some of the citizens of Ottawa say, I felt harassed, I felt intimidated, I felt unsafe, do you believe them?
I believe that's how they felt. Again, I can't say I never witnessed any of that. Obviously, the last thing that we ever wanted to do when we came here was to make the citizens of Ottawa feel that way. And I guess, you know, as we alluded to even in our letter with the mayor, right, like, we never intended for that to happen, and we didn't want to cause that kind of disruption. And we worked really hard. The road captains worked really hard to keep the emergency lanes open, and of course, the horn injunction came in and worked really hard to ensure that that was adhered to, because we definitely would never wanted anybody to feel that way.
Right, and once the horn injunction came in, that was now a court order. But
Yes.
prior to the court order, did you have a view on the honking?
Well, I did have a view on the honking, as even Mr. Barber said. After a couple of days, it was getting to be a bit much for me. You know, trying to walk down the street and have a conversation with somebody was sometimes difficult. But again, I stayed in the Ark Hotel for a few days and then at the Sheraton Hotel for a few days. And at least in my room, maybe I was preoccupied, but I didn't hear a lot of horns. But then we were on, I guess, Slater and Albert.
Did you see yourself as someone who had a level of influence over the convoy and the protest?
I felt like I was respected, that my opinion was respected by most of them, yes.
Did you ever consider, given what you said, that you started to get annoyed at the horns? I take it you probably at some point understood that the horns was causing frustration to a lot of people. Is that fair?
I'd heard that, yes.
Did you ever consider taking any steps to use the respect you had to reduce or eliminate the horn honking prior to the court order?
On or about February 4th, I want to say, my Facebook page was disabled, which is how I accessed the Convoy page to do videos. So I couldn't have, I guess, but I never really considered it because I left that type of stuff up to the captains.
And was it, again, given the respect that you felt you had, and the evidence bears that out, or that we've heard a lot of evidence on that, do you think that if you had asked the captains to take action with respect to the horns, that they would have listened to you?
Well, they already were, so it wasn't necessary for me to.
So had you instructed the captains to stop the horn honking?
I don't know. I don't think I instructed them to. I believe we had discussions about the horns, though.
And what was the result of those discussions?
Well, for sure, I know Mr. Barber would go out and try and talk to the drivers, and I believe Mr. Marazzo was also out to try and get them to slow or cease, become less frequent, sorry.
It's okay. I'm going to move to another topic now, and I apologize, I am moving around in time.
It's okay.
The commissioner is aware that on January 30th, you attended a press conference with Mr. Barber and Mr. Dichter. This would be before the arrival of Mr. Wilson. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do, yes.
Okay. And you had mentioned earlier that you were uncomfortable attending a press conference on February 2nd. Do you recall why you were comfortable attending this press conference on January 30th?
Well, I wouldn't say I was comfortable. I was still quite nervous, but Mr. Barber and Mr. Mr. Barber and Mr. Dichter were friends of mine, and also we had made the conscious decision at that point to not have the mainstream media there, so I felt like the independent media were not going to be aggressive with me, if that makes sense.
And with respect to the Taking Back Our Freedoms press conference, was your understanding the mainstream media would be there?
They were there, yes.
If we could go, so the video, the commission has the video, it's COM 50850. I'm not proposing to pull it up because, again, that would be the end of the day. But unless there's objection, I would like to enter it into the record. And then I'm going to ask you about the transcript, which is COM 895.
Yes.
So if we could pull up COM 895 and go to page 10 of the transcript, page 11 of the PDF. So if we can scroll down. So scroll down, stop right there. Actually scroll up just a little bit. There we go. So an unidentified reporter asks you, notes that Maxime Bernier has sort of had a rally here in downtown Ottawa today. Are you associated with him at all? Are you pleased with support he's given the convoy? What are your thoughts on that? And you respond, we're not associated. We took a vote as an organization, all the committee heads and the organizers, and we are not partisan. We had reached out to a couple of others. A couple of other ones reached out to us, and we wanted to get up and speak, and we said no. That's not what we're about. This is a grassroots movement, and no politicians are going to represent us. I mean, they're kind of the reason we're in this mess in the first place. Do you recall saying that?
I do.
Right. Why was it important to you that the movement was nonpartisan?
Well, because I guess right within the first couple days of us starting to organize before we'd left, I did have politicians reaching out to me that wanted to get up and speak. And I just felt like we had our message, and that's the message that we needed to stick to without getting it convoluted with the messages of other politicians. And so by this point, to tell you the truth, I shouldn't say that, I'm telling the truth, but it was about 3 days into organizing the convoy that I knew that my time with the Maverick Party was done. And the reason I knew that it was done was because I was sitting at my kitchen table, and we had chats with the different road captains in the different areas going on Messenger, and I was chatting with the Quebec team, and we were told there was 1,000 truckers ready to come and support us. And I had, I guess, an epiphany moment. And there's me, you know, chatting here, and I got Google Translate on the other one, and I'm talking to the Quebecers, me and Albertan. And I just had this moment where I just thought, this division has all been a lie. They're the same as us. And I knew that I didn't want to see Canada divided at that point. And I resigned from my position with the Maverick Party up 2 or 3 days after I arrived in Ottawa.
So, as I understand what you just said there, that seeing the pan-Canadian nature of the convoy led you to no longer be interested in an Alberta secession?
That's correct.
Do you still hold that
I
feeling?
do. As a matter of fact, I'm going to learn French.
We've already referenced that Mr. Eros had an interview with the commission and provided us some information. One of the things Mr. Eros said was that he suggested, I should say, in his interview that once Mr. Wilson and the other lawyers arrived in around February 3rd, I guess, as he describes it, the Western sovereigntist movement tried to take control of the narrative. Do you have, at any point in time, did you get any sense that there was direction or influence from the people that you would have known through your time at the Maverick Party?
Absolutely not. No.
Did anyone who you had affiliations with or know from the Maverick or Wexit Party join you in Ottawa?
The only person that I saw that came out from there was a gentleman that had ran as a candidate for the Maverick Party who was a friend of mine. His name was Tarek.
Anyone else?
Not that I can remember. Oh, sorry, my bad. Colin Kruger also showed up for a few days.
When did you first become aware of the protests and blockades in Coutts, Alberta?
Oh, I'm not even sure. We had so much going on here to deal with. I remember hearing about the borders, but I'm not sure when it was. It has already been in the news for a few days, I think.
Did you know anyone who was participating in the protests or blockades there?
It's sort of my home area, so I do know of 2 of my friends that were there for sure. But I believe my parents even took food there one day. But other than that, I don't know.
Were your friends there, were either of them involved in organizing the protests or the blockades?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Were you communicating with your friends who were in Coutts?
I think one of them had sent me a text message just to see how I was doing, because he was a friend of mine, and mentioned that he was there. But other than that, no.
Did your friends or anyone reach out to you to request support or guidance on how to organize a protest?
Never.
Did you have any understanding about the makeup of the protest group at Coutts?
I did not. I really did not have time to follow what was happening closely. I just knew that they were happening.
What did you understand their goals to be?
I think they were there, I assume they were there for the border mandates.
Did your friends tell you what they were doing when they were participating?
No,
Or, sorry, why they were participating, to be more precise?
no.
Did you have any communications with any other protesters at any of the other protests in Canada that were occurring at the same time as the Ottawa protests?
No, sir.
Anyone, any communications with anyone in Surrey,
No, sir.
Emerson,
No, sir.
Windsor?
No, sir.
If we could pull up HRF 1294. So if you scroll down, so this is an email dated Friday, February 11th, 2022. And while it's blocked out, I believe this is an email that was sent to you. Is that correct?
I had 15,000 emails, maybe.
Well, let's scroll up and put some context to
Sure.
it then. So you see there on 2 days later, there's an email message from February 13th from Tamara with a signature, sincerely Tamara Lich. So it appears that you're forwarding this email onto someone named Danny.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have any reason to believe you didn't receive the email down below?
I don't, yeah, I don't have any reason to believe I didn't. There was a lot I didn't get to.
And if we can scroll down. So it says, good afternoon. Please, we are looking for help to get in touch with an Ottawa convoy organizer or someone who can help us. My uncle is desperately trying to organize the convoy in Windsor. Currently, there is no persons in charge. We are in immediate need of help and direction from the Ottawa Convoy organization. We are not looking for funds so much as support, direction, and to make the connection with your convoy. And scroll down. I will continue reading. And then it's signed by a Kathleen Tom in brackets Hogan. Do you recognize the name Kathleen Tom or Kathleen Hogan?
I do not.
Do you recall if you had any other communications from Miss Tom?
I don't.
Do you recall, does this refresh your memory at all about whether or not you received any other similar messages from anyone in Windsor or any of the other protest locations?
No, like I said, I had a lot of emails that I never got to, but I don't recall seeing any of them.
Now I'm going to ask you some questions about the agreement that was reached with the mayor of Ottawa with respect to the moving of the trucks. And again, the commission has heard a lot of evidence about that, but I have a few questions for you. When did you first come to know that it was possible that there might be the opportunity to have a discussion with the mayor?
Well, we had a meeting with Mr. French, I believe it was February the 11th. At that point, he didn't indicate to me who he was representing. I think he was just trying to open some negotiations, and I think it was maybe the next day or after that that I found out that it was from the mayor,
And so
or that he was there on behalf.
And so you said that was February the 11th?
I think it was a Friday, February the 11th.
And as we understand it, the letters that you and the mayor exchanged were on February the 12th. Does that accord with
Yes.
your recollection?
It does.
So that happened pretty quickly, didn't it?
It did, yes.
Can you explain to me how that developed over such a short period of time?
Well, as I said, we had a meeting with Mr. French and some of the road captains and other volunteers, and it happened really quickly because we wanted, I viewed it as a first step to start, getting the trucks out of the downtown core so that we could get those areas opened up for the citizens. And they've been saying here, shrinking the footprint or whatever. And it did happen really fast. And you have to understand that we had been there now for, I think that was going into our third week. We were tired. We wanted to go home. So we were looking for ways where we could start forming an exit strategy. And while our concern was obviously never with the city of Ottawa, we felt it was a step one, and number two, finally, someone is willing to sit down and just listen to us and have a dialogue with us.
So you were open to the notion of shrinking the protest footprint with an eventual view to an exit? Is that
Yes,
fair?
yeah.
Did you have a timeline in your mind about how much longer you were willing to stay?
Not really. Everything was very fluid and day by day. I guess my hope was that if we could open communications with the mayor and he could see that we weren't, the types of people that we were being described as in the media, that perhaps that would open the door for talks with someone, with MPs or someone in the federal government who would take the time to sit down and listen to us.
You heard Mr. Dichter testify earlier today, I believe. Is that correct?
I heard parts of it.
Parts of it, okay.
Yes.
Well, Mr. Dichter, his evidence in some summary was that he did not want to shrink the footprint, and in fact, he thought shrinking the move up to Wellington was a bad idea, and it was an attempt by some people to make it easier for the police to clear the protests. Was that a view that Mr. Dichter shared with you at any point in time?
I don't recall if he ever did. I don't recall having that conversation, but again, there was lots going on.
Do you recall if anyone within the board of directors or anyone who you were talking to on a regular basis, whether there was any dissenting voices, anyone who thought this was not the right move?
Well, we talked with the road captains before that letter went out and had agreement. We discussed the draft of the letter, I believe, and Mr. Wilson and Mr. Chipiuk drafted it and emailed it to everyone so that they would have a chance to read it also, and waited for the approvals to come back in. I don't recall if any of them strongly opposed it, to tell you, I'm not sure. I don't believe so.
Mr. Dichter also testified today that after the news of the agreement came out, he received thousands of, I think maybe 2,000 messages of people who had concern and seemed disappointed or upset. Was that something he expressed to you?
Not that I recall.
Do you recall receiving any negative feedback from anyone after the deal became public on the 13th?
I think there was some people that felt a little bit confused. I mean, I remember hearing that some people didn't feel or felt a little bit confused about what was happening. I remember hearing something to the effect of Tamara's negotiating with the mayor behind our backs, which was not true. But again, it was just all rumor,
So do you recall someone specifically saying to you that Tamara's negotiating behind your backs?
No, I don't recall any specific people telling. I just remember the gist of some of the things that I was hearing.
Right. And other than the road captains and the board, with the fact of the negotiations, was that something that was discussed with the protesters more generally before the deal was entered into?
We printed off some information after we discussed it as a group, and went out to speak to the truckers about it, to explain to them why we felt this was a really good idea. I'm not sure what the experiences were of the road captains. I know I went out to 88, I believe it was, and had a great conversation with the gentleman that was kind of overseeing out there, and he was in full agreement. I talked to some of the other truckers that were out there, and they were in full agreement also. They all thought it was a good idea.
And we heard today Mr. Dichter talk about the tweets that he made, both from his personal account and from your account, after the deal was announced publicly in the media. When did you first learn that Mr. Dichter had tweeted and then retweeted from your account that there had been no agreement?
Must have been that same evening. I believe I was at the Swiss Hotel when that came out. And I think it was definitely after the fact that I'd heard about it. And it must have been that same evening, I'm assuming.
What was your reaction?
I was shocked, but I knew that Mr. Wilson, they had seen it right away. I think he saw it come up on his Twitter right away, and I trusted them to look after it. corrected, I should say.
Did you ever discuss the tweets with Mr. Dichter?
I don't believe so, because so many things happened after that. Monday was the invocation of the Emergencies Act, which we found out when we were actually, ironically, on our way to meet with Mr. Brian Peckford. And I don't recall having the conversation with him about that, but I could have. It was because it was kind of a big deal.
Well, then the nature of the question was kind of a big deal. Do you, I take it then, but you don't recall any specific conversations with him?
I don't, sir.
Mr. Champ suggested, I think at some point yesterday, that in addition to the tweets that you went on a Facebook live stream at some point and said you didn't support the deal that had been struck with the mayor. Do you have any recollection about that? Does that ring any bells?
That doesn't ring any bells to me.
Were you here yesterday when Mr. King testified?
I was, yes.
And so you would have seen that the commission showed a video that Mr. King released after the deal had been announced, in which he said there was no deal. He said it's a lie, it's a false flag, and told everyone to hold the line. Did you see the video at that time?
I did not.
When was the first time you saw that video?
In totality, was yesterday. I believe I heard about it. Well, I know I heard about it, but I believe that yesterday was the first time I watched it, the whole thing. I might have seen bits of it before.
What was your reaction to seeing it yesterday?
Well, Mr. King wasn't in our meetings, so I don't really have a reaction. I mean, he wasn't attending our meetings. I don't know if like I said, my interactions with him were quite limited. So I don't know if he'd spoken to one of the other road captains or if anybody had told him what was going on. So
I take it he didn't reach out to you.
No.
And would you have expected Mr. King, before coming out and saying that a deal you had entered into was a lie, would you have expected him to come and check with you first?
I guess so. I don't really know. He kind of does his own thing.
Do you still think that Mr. King was at the protest for the right reasons?
I have never heard him speak from his lips that I could hear racist comments. I've seen the videos that have been, online that you guys have shown. I personally have never bared witness to that. And I believe at his core, he was here to, just like the rest of us were, to exercise his democratic rights to a peaceful assembly.
Do you have any regret that Mr. King was associated with the convoy?
I've thought a lot about that question, and he's a part of the story. And I can't really have regrets because it is what it is. Things happened the way that they were supposed to happen, and I guess he had a part to play. I don't know. That's a hindsight is 20/20, right?
So as everyone in this room knows, the Emergencies Act was invoked on February 14th, 2022. After the invocation of the act, what was your understanding about whether or not people could continue to protest in the red zone peacefully?
Well, nobody had ever come up to me and told me that we needed to leave.
Have you seen the flyers that have been shown in the evidence? OPS flyers giving notice that people needed to vacate the area.
I did, yes, yeah, I did see those.
Did you remember seeing flyers like that at the time?
I did see somebody sent me a screenshot of one. I can't remember if I had an actual copy of it, but I had a screenshot of one, and I thought it was odd. Now, it's been a while, but I think it was because there was spelling mistakes and it wasn't signed by anyone. I didn't know I guess at this point, I was kind of questioning the validity of anything I saw, really. And it was definitely alarming. But again, nobody ever came to us and said, you guys have to leave right now. And as far as I was concerned, we were peacefully protesting. We were exercising our democratic rights to be here and to protest.
So if no one came and told you you had to leave, what did you think the impact or purpose of the invocation of the Emergencies Act was?
Again, this is an entirely new world for me. I didn't know. I remember when I believe the city of Ottawa implemented a state of emergency, and then Mr. Ford invoked a provincial state of emergency. And I don't want to sound flippant, but what I saw from those were small groups of police officers standing around to larger groups of police officers standing around. So I didn't understand fully, I guess, what that meant in terms of what was expected of us. So it was really alarming. I remember starting to get quite anxious about what could be coming.
As one of the people who was organizing the movement, as the person who you at least identified had been held out as a leader, even if you didn't feel that way, did you take any steps to figure out what it meant that the Emergencies Act had been invoked and what that meant for the people who were protesting and the people that you understood to be supporting your convoy?
Well, as I said, we were on the way to meet with Mr. Peckford when we heard that Mr. Trudeau was going to be invoking the act or announcing that he was going to be invoking the act later that day. And Mr. Peckford thought it would be a good idea for us to do a press conference about it also. And so we did do a press conference later that day prior to the Prime Minister's press conference. And we wanted to continue and peacefully protest. But I knew that people were leaving, which I encouraged. And I believe it was the 16th. It was the day before I was arrested that some of the road captains and friends that were close to our organization started leaving, which of course I encouraged. I mean, I was concerned about what could be coming. We had heard that there was quite a police presence coming, and obviously I didn't want to see anyone be hurt. I didn't want to see anybody get arrested.
At that point in time, was it your view that it was time to leave Ottawa?
It was getting close.
And you already mentioned that you got arrested on February 17th.
Yes, sir, I did.
Can you tell the commission what it was like to be arrested?
Well, it was, again, kind of ironic because I went down to the War Memorial that day to attend the service that the vets were having there every day. I spent my afternoon walking the streets with a veteran and my husband and Miranda, one of the road captains, just talking to people. And I was aware the night before, I'm sure you saw the video, that it was most likely coming, or that there was a chance that I could be arrested. And we went back to the hotel, and within 15 minutes, everybody's phones started blowing up and that Mr. Barber had been arrested. Mr. Bulford and I were at the Swiss Hotel with Mr. Skubik and Mr. Tyson, and we discussed what we should do, what our next steps should be. And we were concerned that if they were starting to arrest the organizers, that they would come to the hotel. And my husband was there, and Mr. Bulford's wife was there. And obviously that was the last thing that I would ever want my husband to see, was to me be arrested.
We definitely didn't want that sort of activity occurring at the hotel with a woman who had been so kind to us, actually who was about to lose her business until we showed up. But like I said in my video, I wasn't afraid. I believe and still believe that we did an excellent job remaining peaceful, advocating for the police, advocating for respecting the police. And so we made the conscious decision to go out and ask the police if they were looking for us. We walked up to the hill, and I believe it was Metcalf, and we stopped and talked to some officers. I'm not sure what their rank was. There was two Suburbans pointed with their headlights up at the hill, and we walked up to them, and Mr. Bulford identified who we were and asked the gentleman if we heard that they were looking for organizers. We're part of the volunteers, and he indicated to us that he didn't have information on that. Danny asked him maybe a second time, or he asked him another question, and he rolled his window up, communicated with somebody, rolled his window down and said no. And I remember saying, well, if that changes, we're just going to be up at the hill here. And we went up to the hill, and I think we were there for an hour and a half to 2 hours. And we decided to go back to our room. We'd presented ourselves to the police. They indicated that they were not looking for us. We walked down to the Ark Hotel and warmed up. It was cold that night. And I believe Sean was staying there and needed to get something. So we warmed up in there for about 10 minutes and then started heading back to the Swiss Hotel. As we crossed the street, there was construction on my left side of the street in front of the buildings, I remember, so it wasn't very well lit. And as we were walking, I met another couple coming towards us, and the lady hugged me and thanked me, and Danny, and she was crying, and we were standing there talking to this couple, and all of a sudden 3 Suburbans just went, police Suburbans, I think that's what they are, went flying down the street past us. And then a 4th one came and pulled over. And so at that point, I was pretty sure that I was about to be arrested.
How has the arrest affected your life?
I've lost my job. I've lost my freedom of speech. I've lost my freedom to communicate with my friends, which was quite traumatizing because we just experienced something huge. And we didn't get any time to even sit down as a group and just talk about it and talk about our experience. We didn't have that opportunity. That was taken away from me. I have to be very careful about every move that I make. As you know, I was arrested on an alleged breach charge for attending a dinner in Toronto. I had the police show up at the place that I'm staying last weekend because somebody saw me outside smoking a cigarette. I have a daughter that I don't want her to be seen with me. Because I'm worried. I'm so sorry.
Take your time.
I have yet to see the particulars of the mischief that I am alleged to have committed. it's definitely affected my life. It's something that I've never been arrested before. The process, the legal process, I find extremely frustrating. My trial's not till next year. I have to live under these conditions for a year. But I'll make it work. I'll manage. And I did everything I felt that I could do in my power through the lives that I was doing. And I believe it worked, as I was advocating again for peaceful protest, respect the police, please respect other people. That was a big part of the reason I did that live the last night. I saw a lot of those flags, and while I support anyone's freedom of speech, it's not something that resonated with me. I saw and heard of people that were upset with some mainstream media, and I just wanted to, I did my video because regardless of how angry we are with the lack or the leadership that we've seen, the divisive rhetoric, the division between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated that I've seen come from elected officials, civil servants, towards their own people. And I saw those flags one day, and I kept thinking, I got to get to the stage and make a speech. Like I felt that I needed to get there, and I needed to just say, you know, Mr. Trudeau has 3 children, and I have 3 children, and my kids have to wake up and see this stuff on social media too. Actually, when I was arrested, my 19-year-old daughter woke up to read an article that I hung myself in jail. She's 19.
Thank you, Ms. Leach. Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we're at the stage of adjourning for the day, and I think it's welcome for everybody, so we'll come back tomorrow at 9:30.
Sir, this-
You have a question, yes?
Just a request. As you know, the witness is now technically under, cross-examination hasn't started, but we would like permission to be able to communicate with the witness. We actually are all living in the same building. In fact, she's staying.
Pardon me? You have,
Sorry, we'd like permission, sir, leave to be able to communicate with the witness, though she's still under oath. We actually all kind of live in the same apartment buildings and sharing apartments with the witness and things like that. So subject to your direction, whatever works. I understand that that was given to Chief Slawley's counsel. We would like the same prerogative, sir, if that was possible.
I don't think there actually was any permission given. What was pointed out is the rule does not prevent you from speaking to the witness as long as you don't speak about any of the evidence. So, and that's my understanding of the rule. So you don't need my permission unless you want to speak to her about her evidence, in which case that's a different matter.
No, sir, but as we would have the evening, we would anticipate, we have already, but we would anticipate the possibility of continuing to prepare her for cross. But if that's not permitted, sir, we won't do so.
I don't think that's contemplated by the rule. I'm sorry, anyone want to pipe in on this? I'm sorry.
Well, Commissioner, if it's of assistance, and I'm not certain exactly who helped facilitate the way in which we approach the matter with Chief Slawley, but I believe the application of the rule is that the witness's evidence given to date is not the subject of discussion, but that would, I think my friend would be able to speak about the questions that he intends to ask without going back over what the witness has given.
Yeah.
I believe that's how we reached agreement with our friends from the Ottawa Police Service who had raised the issue and with some of your commission counsel.
Yeah, I think its lawyers have to be aware of the rule. It's basically the same rule as applies to in courts, and you can't speak about the cross-examination on the evidence. You can prepare, but that's a different matter. And the line, obviously, we rely on lawyers to respect that, obviously. I'm sure it's the same in Alberta.
Kind of. Yes, sir, it is.
We're all one country. Okay, so till 9:30 tomorrow morning.
The commission is adjourned. La commission est adjournée.